Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Siskin. This is my book that you should own. It's called Playing Solo Jazz Piano. And this is the third in a little three-part series about playing piano in a modal context. And this one is about modal improvisation. If you want to learn about modal voicings or comping in a modal style, you should check out the previous videos. I think you'll enjoy them. So I've got 6 tips for you. Hopefully there's something new for you to learn. Let me just do a little bit of modal improv. So just to set the stage here, the context is that you're staying on one chord for a long time. Let's pretend you're playing Afro Blue, or you're playing So What, or you're playing Impressions, or some tune that's just kind of vampy, or a passion dance. And maybe you have an F mixolydian mode that you're playing. So hopefully you'll come up with something that sounds better than that. So first thing, pentatonics are such an important part of the modal sound. So even though you have, if we're in F mixolydian, you can use 7 notes of that mixolydian scale. Of course, you can use more than those 7 notes, but just, for starters, picking out the pentatonics is really key to getting that sound that a McCoy Tyner or a Chick Corea or a Herbie Hancock gets. And what's kind of cool is that there's 3 each for any major mode. I haven't thought about this beforehand, but I think I can do it. So in an F mixolydian, you'd have the F pentatonic, F. You'd have the E flat major pentatonic, and you'd have the B flat pentatonic. And some people might say, wait, don't you have C minor? Don't you have D minor? And I would answer yes, but they're equivalent to those 3, to those major pentatonics that I showed you. So you can think about 3 major, or you can think of 3 minor, whichever you want to think about is fine. And so I would practice limiting yourself to each of those different pentatonic scales, because that's really such a huge part of the modal sound. Pentatonic built on the 1, not my favorite. The one built on the 7th is actually going to be nicer. Or the one built on the 4th. And it's also great, you hear the great modal players moving between these different pentatonics. So it's not that you have to pick a lane and go with it. You actually want to practice shifting from one pentatonic to another. So if I do a little bit of F, a little bit of B flat, a little bit of E flat, then you're starting to form this really interesting tapestry of pentatonics, which is pretty nifty. The second thing is that you want to find upper structures. So upper structures are chords that are part of the scale. So find triads. What are your triads in the F mixolydian scale? So of course you have an F major triad. You have a G minor triad. Listen to how colorful that is. You have an A diminished. You're probably not going to use that. B flat major, C minor, D minor, E flat major. And a lot of what you hear the great people doing is sticking with some triads or 7th chords. And alternating between different upper structures. So instead of thinking in a scalar way, which can end up sounding kind of mumbly, spread your hand out into this arpeggio position. seventh chords and triads that are already there in the scale. So it's just dividing them up more into thirds than into steps. And in fact, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite licks. I might have already shared this somewhere on this channel. I can't remember. But what this basically looks like is that you're taking seventh chords going down that are native to the mode. I'm going to write it just like that, and I'll show you what we're going to do. I didn't know I was going to share this, otherwise I would have pre-written it, because I value your time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip the first two notes of every other one. I love this as a lick because it's so comfortable under the hand. So instead of D, B flat, we're going to go B flat, D. And then instead of B flat, G, we're going to go G, B flat. You can practice this over each different mode. And it creates a really interesting kind of shape to go along with those upper structures. The third thing, is kind of a more specific version, which we call triad pairs. And triad pairs is when we take two major chords, and usually it's two major chords a whole step apart. And any major mode, you'll be able to find some major chords a whole step apart. So this is, for instance, F and E flat. And then limiting yourself to those triads. So this is just a more specific upper structure where you're limiting yourself to just two triad pairs, two triads, and then you're kind of alternating between them, right? The other, well, I'm gonna get myself in trouble here. This doesn't always have to be major chords. It could be that you're taking C minor and B flat major, for instance, right? The saxophonist Walt Weizikoff is known for having written a book about triad pairs. So that's kind of a fun thing to experiment with. Now, number 4, we talked about, if you saw my video about comping, side steps are such an important part of the modal style. Usually, if we're going to sidestep, we sidestep up a half step. That's at least been my experience. Maybe people know more than I do. And side steps are these ways that we're going to create a sense of tension and release even when the harmony remains static. So if we're playing F mixolydian, right? So I'm essentially moving, if we're thinking about the equivalent major scales, right? F mixolydian is like B flat major, and then F sharp sus is like B major. So I'm going. So I'm essentially going up a half step, and then I'm allowing each of those notes to resolve. Now it really has to be done intentionally in a bid for tension and release. It can't just be like, well, I'm going to play F for a little while, I'm going to play F sharp for a little while. You have to set up these kinds of waves of tension and release. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But first, we already kind of mentioned that shapes are really important. I'm a big advocate that shapes are important no matter whether you're playing modal jazz, tonal jazz, bebop, blues, whatever. The shape of your line has to be interesting, unpredictable, curvy. And so that's especially true in modal jazz, where we don't have a lot of other things necessarily to pay attention to. So have a wide variety of intervals. Try to put some fourths in. We love our fourths in modal jazz. But if you're just going to play... If you're going to play very stepwise, it's going to feel very flat. So you want to make these kinds of shapes that jump around. that my hand is almost always spread out. I never really have my hand in this kind of 5-finger position. And for when I see my students play, so often they're staying in this kind of a closed position. But real improvisers, I think, have their hands And just a side note, this isn't point number 6, but when you're playing in a modal context, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in the mode. That means that the mode is essentially your ground floor. So you can add chromatic notes. You can add blues scale. You can add all these things from outside the mode. And if you listen to the different soloists on So What, it's such a great example. Because Miles stays mostly in the mode, but throws in some neighbor tones and stuff. And then Coltrane plays pretty chromatically. And then Cannonball plays a lot of blues. So it's almost like 3 different approaches. But if I'm playing F Mixolydian, I could put in a passing tone there. I could put in a neighbor tone. I could put in an enclosure. What the modalness is telling me more is that each note of that mode is really equal. And I can kind of resolve to any note of that mode, which is really different than playing tonal jazz, where you really have to aim for those thirds and fifths and sevenths and things like that. Yeah, and don't discount the blues scale. Throw in some blue notes. The 6th tip is really important, which is that you have to think about your phrasing. If it's just kind of a big run-on sentence, or if the phrasing doesn't have a logic to it, then it's just going to sound like a lot of notes. So if you watched my comping video earlier, this will feel like a repeat, but it's very important. I would continue to think and feel 2, 4, 8-bar phrases. When you hear Coltrane and McCoy and Alvin Jones and Jimmy Garrison play, they're clearly still thinking in these normal traditional phrase structures. So as you're practicing tension and release, think about creating tension kind of that leads to a release in the first bar of a phrase, that leads to a release after 8 bars, that leads to a release after 4 bars. So 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. So you can create as much tension as you want, as long as you have a really good plan to release it in terms of that overall phrase structure. All right, you guys, that's it for that 3-part modal series. Again, this book is your friend playing solo jazz piano. Please stay tuned. I appreciate likes. I appreciate comments. I appreciate good vibes, right? See y'all soon. Bye-bye.